The pills rattled gently in my palm like tiny warnings. 40 years of building a company, raising a son, surviving loss after loss. And now I was staring at 30 white capsules and the kind of silence only grief can carve. I thought cancer would be the hardest part. I was wrong. It was hearing my son say, "You shouldn't be making financial decisions anymore." That was the moment I knew. He wasn't coming to help me heal. He was coming to take everything. But what he didn't know was I had already protected it all. Quietly, completely. Funny how life works. I spent 43 years building Hayes Medical Supply from nothing, growing it out of a cramped 2-room storefront into one of the most respected regional suppliers in the Northeast. I negotiated contracts, led boardrooms full of skeptical men, navigated recessions and regulation. But now all that grit and strategy boiled down to this: a bottle of pills I couldn't live without, and a doctor who told me I might not see another Thanksgiving. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 3. 6 months to a year, maybe longer if I responded to treatment. Dr. Reed had said it gently, with that practiced voice doctors use when they've done this too many times. I remember blinking at him while he said words like aggressive, experimental, palliative. The world around me had gone quiet, but inside my chest something had clicked. Not panic, not even fear. Something cooler. A slow, clean acceptance. I wasn't afraid of dying. Not really. What gnawed at me was the way people started looking at you once you got a diagnosis like mine. Like you were already halfway gone. Like your time, your mind, your money no longer belonged to you. Just part of a countdown someone else was managing. I set the bottle down on the countertop. Granite, cool, spotless. David and I remodeled this kitchen in 2007. He wanted something sleek. I wanted something warm. We compromised like we always did. He's been gone since 2015. Heart attack. I still talk to him sometimes when I'm making coffee. Still look at his chair at the kitchen table before I sit. The house was quiet save for the ticking wall clock and the distant sound of gulls over the bay. It was too big for one person, I knew that. But I wasn't ready to let it go. Not yet. This house had held the best and worst years of my life. It had cradled holidays, arguments, laughter, silence. And it had held me in the past few months while I learned to live with the weight of my body failing from the inside. The phone buzzed against the counter, pulling me out of my thoughts. A text from Michael. "Mom, we need to talk. Rachel and I are coming over tonight." Just like that. "No, how are you?" "No, is this a good time?" Just a statement of fact. Michael had always been like that. Direct, polished, efficient. CFO energy, as they say. I could practically see him checking off a task list somewhere. Talk to Mom, check. Rachel would come too, of course. Always the pair. She wore ambition like perfume. Strong, expensive, and impossible to ignore. Together they made a perfectly symmetrical couple. On paper. I stared at the message, feeling that familiar knot in my chest. It wasn't the cancer. It was the tension I'd come to expect every time my son reached out. Not to see how I was doing, but because they needed something. Last time it was advice on a condo investment in Boston. Before that, a referral for a state contact on a medical bid. And before that, years ago now, it was, "Mom, can you co-sign this loan?" That loan, by the way, was paid off late and never acknowledged again. I typed back, "Of course. See you at 6. Then deleted it. No more filling the silences with pleasantries. No more softening my boundaries. I typed, "Okay, 6 o'clock. Then set the phone down, walked over to the kitchen window and looked out over the backyard. The hydrangeas were starting to bloom. Blue full defiant. I'd planted them the year after David died. They always came back stronger than I expected. Just like me, tonight would not be the first time Michael came with an agenda, but it might be the last time I pretended I didn't know what he was after. By the time the doorbell rang, I had already set out a fresh pot of coffee, a plate of shortbread cookies, and a small dish of mixed nuts that Rachel always avoided, but Michael pretended to enjoy. I didn't know why I bothered, except that habit is its own kind of muscle memory. I opened the door to find them standing exactly as I expected. Michael in a slate gray suit with no tie, the first button of his shirt undone, just enough to seem casual. Rachel wore a cream blouse, tailored black pants, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She clutched a leather folder under one arm. "Hi, Mom," Michael said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. His cologne was sharp and familiar. "Hi, Eleanor," Rachel added with a polite nod. She didn't call me Mom, never had. I didn't take it personally. I stepped aside. "Come in." They walked in as if it were a listing to be evaluated, eyes sweeping the entry, the wood floors, the framed black and white photos along the hallway. Rachel lingered on a picture of David and me from our anniversary trip to Sedona. She said nothing. The living room still looked exactly as David and I had arranged it. Earth tones, textured fabrics, a few pieces of art we'd picked up over the years, most of them by artists no one else knew. We hadn't cared. The room was made to be lived in, not to be shown off. Michael and Rachel sat down on the leather love seat close together, but with that slight space between them that married couples think no one notices. I took my usual spot on the armchair across from them, the one David always called my captain's chair. Michael rested his elbows on his knees and looked at me with that calm, rehearsed seriousness he used in investor meetings. "Mom, we're really glad you're feeling well enough to have us over." I smiled faintly. "I'm still here." Rachel offered a sympathetic tilt of the head. "And you look great, really." "Thanks." There was a moment of stillness. The only sound was the ticking of the wall clock behind me. Michael leaned forward. "So, we wanted to check in, see how you're doing. Not just health-wise, but everything else. Living alone, managing things day to day. The company, the property, your accounts. It's a lot, especially now." I said nothing, just watched him. Rachel opened the folder and glanced down, then back up at me. "We've been talking and we just think it might be time to consider some support. Nothing drastic, of course. Just delegating a few things." Michael took over smoothly. "We know how hard you've worked. No one's questioning that. But the truth is, it's a lot for one person. You shouldn't have to carry all of it, especially while you're going through treatment." He paused, then softened his voice. "I've handled plenty of transitions like this for my clients. You could give me temporary financial power of attorney just to help oversee things. Investments, taxes, anything you don't want to deal with. It would take the pressure off." "There it was," Rachel added. "It's actually very common. I've helped several older clients set it up. It doesn't take away your control. It just allows someone you trust to step in and handle logistics while you focus on your health." I looked between the two of them. Michael's expression was all concern. Rachel's was professional, careful, neutral. Neither of them looked at me like a mother. I'd become a problem to manage. I reached for my coffee cup and took a sip, letting the silence stretch just a beat too long. "And who said I wasn't managing it?" I asked. "Setting the cup down." Michael hesitated. "We didn't mean it that way." Rachel smiled quickly. "Of course not. You've been amazing. Truly. We just want to make sure nothing slips through the cracks. With everything going on," my stomach tightened. I didn't want to do this now, not in my own living room, but I also knew I couldn't ignore it. This wasn't about support. This was about access. About positioning. Michael shifted. "Look, Mom, this house alone. Keeping up with it, the maintenance, property taxes. It might be time to consider downsizing. Or even..." He paused. "Selling." Rachel nodded. "It's a seller's market. You'd get a great price, especially being so close to the water." I stared at them both. "Do you two have a realtor lined up already?" Rachel blinked. "Of course not. You've run the numbers though, haven't you?" Michael looked away for half a second, just long enough to confirm everything I needed to know. I sat back and crossed my legs slowly the way I used to in boardroom negotiations when I wanted to make the room wait. "You two have been very thorough," I said. "Impressive." Michael cleared his throat. "It's not like that. Then what is it like? Rachel set the folder down on the coffee table. It's love. It's concern. No, I said quietly. It's a strategy. And I've seen better ones. The air shifted. For a moment, no one moved. I stood. I'll think about it. Rachel smiled again tight. Of course. No pressure. Just let us help you. I nodded. I'm sure you'd be very helpful. They left not long after with just enough small talk to mask the tension. I watched them drive away from the window, Rachel behind the wheel, Michael already pulling out his phone. In the empty silence that followed, I sat back down, stared at the folder they'd left behind, and finally understood. This wasn't a conversation. It was a move. A coordinated, professional, well-timed move. And I wasn't going to play along. I sat there for a long time after they left the folder, still resting on the coffee table like a silent accusation. The ticking of the wall clock resumed its steady rhythm, indifferent to the weight settling in my chest. It wasn't just the conversation that stung. It was the clarity it left behind, the precision, the planning. Somewhere along the line, I had stopped being a person in Michael's eyes. I had become an asset, a portfolio to be managed. I leaned back into the armchair, let my eyes drift to the family photo above the fireplace. Michael was 17 in that picture, smiling beside David in his cap and gown, fresh out of high school with the whole world waiting for him. I remembered how proud I felt that day. Proud of him. Proud of the way we'd raised him. Proud of the future he was stepping into. I also remembered what came next. Harvard Business School hadn't come cheap, and the scholarship only covered so much. I liquidated a significant portion of our retirement savings to cover the rest. David had been nervous. We're not young Elle, he'd said. But I insisted. It's for Michael. He deserves every opportunity. We never asked him to pay it back. Never expected a cent. After David passed, Michael had approached me about buying his first home outside Boston. He and Rachel were newly married, ambitious, already aiming for a bigger life than they could afford. I remember sitting across from the bank officer signing my name as co-signer, putting up part of my own house as collateral. You know, it's just temporary, Michael had said at the time. We'll refinance in a year. Just need to get in the door. They never refinanced. My name stayed on that loan for 5 years. I only found out by accident through a call from the bank when Michael missed a payment by a week. The panic in my gut that day. The fear that I'd lose everything I'd built because my son was careless, still lingered in my muscle memory. He apologized, of course. Promised it wouldn't happen again. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Then there was Rachel. When she got into Columbia Law, she didn't ask for help, not directly. But Michael did over dinner one Sunday just after she'd started her first semester. She's going to graduate with a mountain of debt, he'd said. It's not fair after everything she's worked for. If there's anything you can do, I paid her tuition for the final 2 years. Quietly, without fanfare. I told myself it was a gift, a gesture of support, a way to help them build something solid. But somewhere in the quiet that followed, something shifted. Gratitude never came. There were no thank you notes, no small moments of appreciation, only assumptions, expectations. I had stopped being generous and started being useful. The room felt colder now, even with the heat still humming. I wrapped the shawl tighter around my shoulders and stared at the fireplace, though I hadn't lit it since February. What bothered me most wasn't that they had asked. It wasn't even that they had taken. It was that they had forgotten. Forgotten how many times I'd said yes. Forgotten how many corners I'd rounded for them. Forgotten that every decision I'd made, every risk I'd taken, every sacrifice, was rooted in love. And now they wanted to manage me out of my own life. I slowly walked back into the kitchen and opened the cabinet above the fridge. From the very back, I pulled down a red leather folder. It held every financial document I'd kept private since David died. My living trust, the updated will-the-sale agreement from Hayes Medical Supply. The company had been acquired 2 years ago, just before the first signs of illness. $8. $4 million minus taxes and fees placed discreetly across 3 accounts. None of it was in their names. I flipped through the pages, reminding myself of every decision I'd already made, every clause I had written, every boundary I had drawn. I wasn't bitter, but I was done being blind. I returned the folder to its place, poured myself another cup of coffee, and stood by the window as the sky deepened into evening. I had given them everything they needed to build the lives they wanted, and they had learned how to take, how to ask, how to push, but not how to remember where it all came from. And now they wanted more. It was the first time in a long while I felt a quiet kind of strength rise up in me. Not anger, not resentment, resolve. They'd taught me what they were capable of. Now it was my turn to show them what I was capable of. The phone rang just as I was rinsing out my mug. At first I thought it might be Michael again. Maybe a follow-up message disguised as concern, another reminder that he just wanted to help. But when I looked at the screen, the name made my breath catch. Miguel Alvarez. I hadn't spoken to him in over 3 decades. The last time we talked, he was boarding a flight to Sao Paulo, promising to write, which he did for a time. But life moved on. I married David. He expanded his small real estate firm into something far bigger than either of us had dreamed. He built hotels on cliffs and tucked inside colonial cities, always with his name on the sign Alvarez Collection. Last I heard, he'd settled in Portugal. Cascais, I think. I answered on the 4th ring, unsure of what voice I'd hear or what version of myself would answer. "Hello, Eleanor," he said, and just the warmth in that one word made me close my eyes. I wasn't sure this number still worked. "It does," I said, trying to steady my tone. "Apparently so do I." He chuckled low and familiar. "I heard about your diagnosis through Thomas DeLeon. He ran into your cousin in San Diego." "Of course. News always traveled on odd winds when you got to our age. I hope it's okay that I called," he added. "I know it's been a long time." "It's more than okay. It's unexpected." A silence passed that wasn't uncomfortable. "I should have called sooner," he said. "You've been on my mind more than I'd admit." I swallowed hard. "Well, now you've caught me somewhere between a medical experiment and a poorly written soap opera, so I suppose your timing is perfect." He laughed again. Still sharp. We talked for a while. About nothing and everything. His hotel business was still thriving. He'd stepped back from daily operations, but still advised. He lived in a restored villa in Cascais overlooking the Atlantic. He swam every morning, drank too much espresso, and painted on the weekends. "I even learned to cook," he said. "You wouldn't believe it." "Nen, I'm not sure I do." He paused, then lowered his voice. "Thomas mentioned that you sold the company." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. 2 years ago, quietly. "And you kept it quiet. Of course you did. It wasn't anyone's business, not even your son's." I hesitated, especially not his. He exhaled softly. "So it's like that. It's worse." He let that sit a moment before continuing. "Then maybe it's time you remembered who you are." I blinked. "You built a company from scratch, Eleanor. You survived more in 1 decade than most people do in a lifetime. You raised a son, buried a husband, and still made it to 70 without losing your soul." My throat tightened. "And now you're letting that boy try to manage you like an asset in his spreadsheet." I let out a bitter laugh. "You don't miss a beat. I miss you." I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the garden, the same garden David and I had once planted with raised beds and too many tomato vines. The wind moved through the hydrangeas outside like a whisper I couldn't catch. "You have $8 million, Eleanor Miguel said gently. "You can choose whatever life you want. You're not stuck. You're not helpless. And you're not done." I didn't answer right away. I was trying to remember the last time someone had spoken to me like that. With belief, not pity. "I want you to come here," he said. "Even just for a little while. Get away from all that. Let your body rest. Let your mind breathe. Let someone take care of you without trying to own you." A part of me wanted to say no out of reflex, but something inside me shifted. "Not a yes. Not yet. but the opening of a door I hadn't known was still there. "I'll think about it. I'll send you the details anyway," he said. "You won't regret it." We said our goodbyes gently without promises, but I knew he meant every word. After I hung up, I stood for a long time letting the silence return. The house no longer felt quite so heavy. Something had cracked in the walls, just a hairline fracture, but enough to let in the air. I hadn't thought of Miguel in years. I hadn't let myself remember how it felt to be truly seen, to be spoken to without conditions or calculations. And now, out of nowhere, someone had reminded me who I used to be. Maybe, just maybe, that woman wasn't gone yet. It was nearly midnight when I picked up the phone. The house had gone quiet hours ago, the soft buzz of the refrigerator and the creak of old floorboards, the only reminders that it still held life. I sat at the kitchen table with the red leather folder in front of me, open now, its contents spread across the table like pieces of myself I'd kept hidden. I scrolled to Robert Klein's number and hit call. "Eleanor." His voice was rough with sleep, but alert. He'd always been that way. Precise, reliable, a man who never forgot a name or missed a clause. "I'm sorry to call this late," I said. "You're allowed," he replied. "What's going on? I need to make some changes," I said. "Major ones." There was a pause, then the sound of him sitting up. "Talk to me." I walked to the window, watching the garden bathed in moonlight. "I want to revoke the financial power of attorney that names Michael. Effective immediately." Another pause. "All right. I also want to update my will. Remove Michael and Rachel as primary beneficiaries. Establish a charitable trust instead, one that supports low-income families needing long-term care." "Understood. And I need help opening an offshore account. Discreet, but legal. Portugal preferably. Cascais." Now he was fully awake. "Eleanor, this is quite a shift. What happened?" "They came for me," I said quietly. "Not with a knife, but with a pen and a smile. They're circling like vultures, Robert. And I won't let them strip me down before I'm even cold." He sighed. "I had a feeling this was coming. I've made enough sacrifices. For once, I want to protect what's mine. Not just the money, but the dignity. Are you prepared for the fallout? I'm prepared for war if that's what it takes." He was quiet for a moment. "All right. We'll need to meet in person. I'll draft the revocation and new estate documents. We'll need a doctor's note confirming you're mentally competent. I've already scheduled an evaluation for Friday with Dr. Sherman. Neurological and cognitive. Smart. Robert." I hesitated, my hand resting lightly on the window glass. "I know Michael. If he senses I'm cutting him off, he'll retaliate. He may try to file for conservatorship, claim diminished capacity. Financial exploitation. I want to be ready. I'll build you a firewall," he said. "But Eleanor, this will change everything. It won't just be documents. It'll be courtrooms. It'll be messy. I'm 70 years old, Robert. I'm dying. Let them come." He chuckled, once dry and almost proud. "There's the Eleanor I remember. We discussed logistics for another 15 minutes. Names, accounts, safe deposit access, notarization timelines. He'd courier initial drafts to the house within 2 days. I'd sign under video and in person. There would be witnesses. Everything ironclad. When I finally hung up, the house felt different. Not warmer, not colder, but sharper, like the walls had realigned as if they knew I wasn't shrinking anymore. I gathered the papers back into the folder one by one, smoothing each page before closing it. Then I stood and poured myself a small glass of sherry from the bottle I'd been saving since Christmas. The liquid was deep gold, aged and unapologetic. I raised the glass in the dark kitchen. To clarity, I whispered, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was holding the pen again, not for signing away my future, for writing the next chapter. They came again on a Sunday. Michael texted me in the morning. "No pleasantries, just Rachel and I are coming by around 3. Not a question. A statement. The kind that assumes access and expects compliance. I didn't bother replying. By the time the doorbell rang, I had already brewed a fresh pot of Earl Grey, laid out the nice porcelain cups David always liked, and placed a single folder on the dining table. I chose that table deliberately. Solid oak, no frills, the one where we used to do family Christmas dinners. Today it would host something far less festive. "Hi, Mom," Michael said, stepping inside without waiting for me to move. Rachel followed close behind, polished and composed, a leather document envelope tucked under her arm. "You look well," she said, scanning my face with clinical precision. "I've had a good week," I replied, offering nothing more. We sat. They chose the side-by-side seats again, like a legal team about to present closing arguments. I remained at the head of the table, my teacup untouched. Michael cleared his throat. "We just wanted to circle back on our conversation from the other day." Rachel placed the envelope in front of her and rested both hands on top of it. "I brought the updated documents," she said. "Power of attorney plus the proposed property transfer language. Nothing binding yet. Just drafts." I nodded slowly, as if I were hearing it all for the first time. Michael leaned forward. "This isn't about control, Mom. It's about helping you focus on your health, not on paperwork or stress," Rachel added. "You can review everything. We're happy to answer any questions." I reached down beside me and pulled out my own folder. Red leather, firm, spine edges crisp. I set it gently on the table and slid it toward the center. "What's this?" Michael asked. "My own paperwork," I said. Rachel hesitated, but then opened it. Her eyes flicked rapidly across the page. Her jaw tightened. Michael leaned in to read over her shoulder, then froze. "You revoked the existing power of attorney." I met his eyes. "Effective 3 days ago. All prior authorizations are null and void. I've informed the bank, my CPA, and my estate attorney." Rachel spoke carefully. "You didn't mention this at our last meeting." "I wasn't required to." Michael sat back, expression flattening. "You really think this is the best time to be making impulsive decisions?" I tilted my head. "Do I seem impulsive to you?" He exhaled hard. "Mom, you don't understand how this looks. You're sick. You're under stress. Rachel and I are trying to help. And yet here you are drawing up contracts in my dining room before I've even poured the tea." Rachel opened her mouth to speak, then closed it. Michael's voice dropped a little colder now. "You don't know what you're doing." I smiled. "That's where you're wrong. For the first time in years, I know exactly what I'm doing." The silence that followed was thick. Michael shifted in his seat, his hand forming a loose fist on the table. "So what now? You think you can manage all of this on your own? Finances, property, legal matters I've already started. I have legal counsel, financial advisors, and more energy than either of you expected." Rachel looked down at the table. Her fingers tapped once against the envelope before she gathered it up and placed it back in her bag. Michael didn't move. I stood slowly, walking to the sideboard where I kept the tea. I poured myself a cup, the clink of china the only sound in the room. "You're both welcome to stay for tea," I said without turning around. "But the conversation is over," neither of them replied. When I turned back, Michael was staring at me. Not with the confusion of a son worried for his mother, but with the hard, flat calculation of someone realizing a strategy had failed. He stood. "We'll be in touch." Rachel murmured something polite I didn't catch. They left quickly, their exit quieter than their arrival. I watched from the front window as they reached their car. Michael didn't open the door right away. He just stood there staring at the ground like he was working a new angle. I closed the curtain. The tea was a little cold by then, but I drank it anyway. Not for comfort, for the taste of something I'd almost forgotten. Control. The breeze off the Atlantic was different than anything I'd known in Newport. Saltier, warmer, and somehow ancient. From the balcony of Miguel's villa in Cascais, the waves below shimmered like brushed silver crashing against the cliffs in a rhythm that steadied something inside me. I had arrived 3 days ago, escorted straight from the airport by a quiet driver in a Navy car, who greeted me with Senora Hayes, welcome to Portugal. Miguel had arranged everything. The villa was 3 stories of sunlit stone and glass nestled among palms and pink bougainvillea, with wide wooden doors that opened to sea air and the sound of seagulls. "You need rest," Miguel said as he helped me settle into the guest wing. "Not just of the body, but of the soul." He hadn't changed much. Still tall silver at the temples, now his Spanish accent softened by decades abroad. His voice could still make me forget my age. The mornings here started with strong coffee and fresh bread on the terrace. I slept better than I had in months, waking up without dread sitting on my chest. Miguel gave me space. We talked over lunch sometimes, walked through the narrow cobblestone streets, but he never pressed. On the second day, I met Dr. Sofia Carvalho. She arrived precisely at 10, a tall woman with kind eyes and the confidence of someone who had seen everything and still chose optimism. She reviewed my medical records thoroughly, speaking fluent English with only a trace of a lilt. "You're responding better than expected," she said, looking over my scans. "The tumor is still present, but there's clear reduction in size compared to 3 months ago. That's rare with this type of cancer." I blinked, barely able to process the words. "You mean it's shrinking?" "It is. Slowly but steadily. We'll adjust your treatment here to support that trend. Less toxicity, more targeted focus. We've had success combining it with immunotherapy and climate-specific protocols." Miguel, who had sat quietly through the consultation, reached for my hand. "You hear that?" I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat that wasn't from illness. For the first time in a long time, hope didn't feel like a lie. Dr. Carvalho placed a hand gently on my shoulder. "Rest, eat well, let us care for you. Your body is still willing to fight. Help it." After she left, I walked out to the garden overlooking the sea. Miguel followed, a bottle of sparkling water in one hand, his linen shirt fluttering slightly in the breeze. "I've been thinking," he said, settling into the chair beside mine. "This house is too big for me alone. But the garden stays green because someone still walks through it." I glanced at him. He smiled. "Don't worry, I'm not proposing anything complicated." I laughed, more from surprise than anything else. He continued. "But I have been working on a new idea. We're seeing more Americans, retirees, long-term patients, who can't afford decent care at home. I've been considering building a health-centered boutique property, comfortable, dignified quiet. I'd want it to feel like this house." I turned toward him. He shrugged. "With your knowledge of healthcare systems, network supply chains, you'd be invaluable, only if you want to, of course. No pressure." I looked out at the ocean, the horizon wide and endless. It was the first time in years I'd felt someone speak to me as if I were still capable of building something new. Not just surviving, but contributing. "I'll think about it," I said. He nodded. "That's all I ask." Later that evening, I stood barefoot on the balcony, wrapped in a soft shawl, as the sun began its descent behind the sea. The light bathed everything in gold. I sipped tea slowly, feeling its warmth settle into my chest. For the first time since my diagnosis, I didn't feel like a dying woman being handled. I felt like Eleanor Hayes again. Not the version shrinking in hospital waiting rooms or tiptoeing around her son's ambition, but the woman who'd once stood in a conference room and negotiated contracts without blinking. The one who knew when to hold the line and when to walk away. I wasn't just breathing. I was beginning to write again, not with pen and paper, but with choices, with new routes, new direction. And I wasn't done yet. It was a clear morning in Cascais when I received the call from Robert. I had just finished a walk along the marina where the boats bobbed quietly against the docks and locals sipped espresso under striped awnings. I answered on the third ring, already sensing something had shifted. "They filed the petition," Robert said without preamble. I stopped walking. "What kind of petition?" "Michael and Rachel. Filed in Providence Probate Court. They're asking for a determination of incapacity and emergency conservatorship. They're claiming you're no longer capable of managing your financial affairs." I pressed my hand against a stone wall beside me, steadying my breath. On what basis? Your age, your cancer diagnosis, and what they're calling a series of sudden, irrational financial decisions. He paused, including the revocation of power of attorney and the transfer of assets offshore. I didn't speak. I've already notified opposing counsel that we intend to contest. We'll be filing a response within the week. They think they can erase me, I said, my voice flat. Before I'm even gone? They're not going to succeed, Robert said. Not if we move quickly. That night, I sat at Miguel's desk with the red leather folder open again. I had begun recording everything weeks ago. Voice memos, screen captures, scanned letters. I emailed Robert a zip file of the materials. It included a recording of Michael in my kitchen suggesting I stop worrying about the paperwork and just sign. A text from Rachel saying once the POA is signed, we can finally consolidate the accounts. That's, my sissy. A photo of a legal pad I found in Michael's briefcase the day after our first confrontation with the words Shift LLCs to my name before Q3 scribbled across the top. Each item was labeled and time-stamped. I had also forwarded Dr. Carvalho's full neurological assessment, confirming that I was cognitively sound and fully competent to make legal and financial decisions. Robert replied within the hour, "This is gold. We'll use this for our counter-motion and include a demand to dismiss the petition with prejudice." I closed the laptop and exhaled. A few days later, Miguel handed me a newspaper folded to a single page, a column titled When Power Becomes Exploitation, written by Anna Brooks. Her byline stood out. Young, bold, and sharp. She had covered elder financial abuse for years and recently shifted focus to high-profile civil petitions involving adult children and estate coercion. Miguel raised an eyebrow. She called here, said she received an anonymous tip. I didn't ask who had sent it. I had my guesses. The article described a growing trend older adults, especially women, being manipulated under the guise of concern, families seeking control under the banner of care. The story never named me, but the details were close enough to feel like a mirror. The next morning, Anna Brooks emailed me directly. Her message was brief. Ms. Hayes, I believe your experience may help others. Would you consider speaking to me? Off the record at first. With respect. Anna. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I stood on the balcony watching the ocean churn under a windier sky than usual. Somewhere across the Atlantic, my son was trying to bury me in paperwork before illness could finish what it started. But I wasn't helpless. And I wasn't done fighting. The first I heard of their arrival was from Dr. Carvalho. They're here, she said, standing in the doorway to my recovery suite. Your son and his wife. They showed up at the front desk 15 minutes ago asking to see you. I sat up straighter in bed. Did you let them in? No, she said firmly. This is a private clinic. They don't have clearance. And based on their tone, I alerted security immediately. Outside my window, the coastal light had shifted. Still warm, but with the golden haze that signaled late afternoon. I pushed aside the light blanket and reached for my cardigan. My pulse remained steady. I had been expecting this. Downstairs, Michael was not handling things well. He was shouting in English, slow and loud, as if that would make the Portuguese staff suddenly understand or care. I'm here to see my mother. Her name is Eleanor Hayes. I know she's here. You can't keep her from me. One of the nurses calmly repeated, Senhor, esta é uma clínica privada. A paciente não autorizou visitas. Rachel, standing beside him in a tailored navy dress and sunglasses, tried a different route. I'm her daughter-in-law. We're here from the States. She's not well and we're concerned she's being manipulated. But the administrator held firm. No permission, no access. That's when Michael tried to force his way past the check-in desk. Within seconds, 2 security guards flanked him firm but professional. He pushed one aside with his shoulder. The guard stepped forward and blocked his path entirely. Dr. Carvalho appeared from the hallway just as 2 uniformed officers from the Cascais Policia entered through the sliding glass doors. She spoke to them quickly in Portuguese, gesturing to the front desk, the security footage monitor, the clipboard Rachel had been waving around. Michael began to protest. "You can't do this. This is my mother we're talking about." The officer closest to him responded calmly. "You are causing disturbance in a private medical facility. Step outside now, please." Rachel lost her temper. "She's not thinking clearly. Someone is feeding her lies. You don't understand. She's vulnerable and—" Her voice cracked and rose in pitch. She pointed at the officer, then at Dr. Carvalho, then at the security camera above them. "We're American citizens. This is a violation of everything." Michael tried to pull her back, but she shook him off and stepped directly in front of the officer. "What kind of country lets a sick old woman be hidden away and—" She didn't get to finish. The officer raised a hand calmly and motioned to the second one, who stepped forward and began documenting the incident. A small crowd had gathered by then. Patients, family members, even a man from the cafe next door holding a tray of espresso cups. Phones were out, recording. Quietly, but unmistakably, Rachel suddenly realized the attention. Her voice faltered. Michael looked around red-faced and stiff. "You're making a mistake," he muttered mostly to himself. The officer handed them each a written notice. "This is a formal warning for disturbance in a healthcare facility. You will not return to this clinic without legal clearance. If you do, you will be detained." They were escorted outside. From my window upstairs, I could see them on the sidewalk. Rachel pacing in furious circles, phone pressed to her ear. Michael standing still, staring down at the folded warning slip in his hand. They had come to force control, and instead they had made a scene in front of law enforcement, patients, cameras, and their own pride. No one had set a trap. They had simply walked right into the mirror. The knock came just after 4. I had been expecting it. Miguel was out meeting a business partner in Lisbon, which was just as well. This moment was mine alone. I opened the door to find Michael standing on the stone steps, suit jacket, off sleeves rolled to his elbows. Rachel stood beside him, her expression pinched makeup carefully done but unable to hide the wear around her eyes. "Mom," he said simply. "Come in," I replied. They followed me through the cool tile foyer into the sunlit sitting room. The breeze through the open windows carried the scent of salt and lavender. I had laid out a silver tray, tea almond cookies, slices of orange cake. I sat in my usual chair. They took the couch just across the coffee table. Rachel didn't touch the tea. Michael leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees. "You left us no choice." I stirred my cup. "Did I? You disappeared? You refused contact. You cut us off financially. I changed my estate. I didn't cut you off. There's a difference." His tone hardened. "We had to act. We thought something was wrong. You've always been practical, logical, stable. This isn't like you." I met his eyes. "No, Michael. What isn't like me is handing over everything I worked for because my son is impatient." He sat back slightly. Rachel spoke, her voice brittle. "You don't understand the long-term consequences of these choices. The tax implications alone." I held up a hand. "I know exactly what I've done. And more importantly, I know why." I set my cup down gently and stood walking to the sideboard where I kept the red leather folder. "You think this is about emotions, about me being manipulated? But let me be very clear." I turned and looked them both squarely in the face. I sold Hayes Medical Supply in October of 2021. Quietly, cleanly. The deal closed at $8.4 million. I didn't tell you because it was mine to tell or not. Michael blinked. Rachel's mouth fell open slightly, but no words came. I continued, voice steady. "The money is secure, offshore, diversified beyond your reach. Not because I'm vindictive, but because you tried to take it without asking." Michael looked away. I opened the folder and laid out a single page on the table. "This is the updated will. All assets upon my death will transfer to the Eleanor Foundation, a charitable trust focused on elder care and medical equity." Rachel's hand trembled slightly. Michael's jaw flexed. I raised you better, I said softly. I gave you everything. Your education, your first mortgage, even covered part of your wedding when you ran short. I asked for nothing back. No one spoke. And when I needed space dignity time, you sent lawyers. Rachel let out a sudden choked breath. She pressed her hands over her face. Her shoulders shook. Michael stared at the paper like it might catch fire if he looked away. I'll give you privacy, I said, and walked out onto the terrace. The air outside was cooler than before. I leaned against the railing, letting the silence settle behind me. No shouting, no plates thrown, no apologies, just two people coming face to face with the limits of their entitlement. The sea moved endlessly below. I didn't need to look back to know the moment had landed. Some losses you only feel when the door doesn't slam, when it closes quietly from the inside. The article dropped on a Thursday. Miguel handed me the paper with a quiet, measured look. Anna Brooks hadn't buried the lead. It was all there. Front page of the National Weekend Supplement. The 8-nuller battle 70-year-old widow. Fights back against son's legal power grab. The photo they used was one I hadn't seen in years. Me in a navy blazer holding a microphone at a healthcare summit, standing tall. Dignified. Unafraid. The story was well-sourced. Anna had done her homework. She outlined the facts, the quiet sale of my company, the attempted conservatorship, the legal maneuvers, and most damning, the footage of Rachel screaming at police outside a private medical clinic in Portugal. That clip had gone viral, shared, memed, and dissected across social media. But what stayed with people was the quote Anna chose to end the article. My son thought I was slipping away. He didn't realize I was standing up. Within 48 hours, Michael's name was on every financial newsfeed. Clients began distancing themselves from his investment firm. 2 long-term partners issued statements. One hedge fund formally severed ties, citing concerns around ethical practices and reputational risk. Then came the audit. Rachel fared no better. The State Bar Association launched a preliminary review. Her firm removed her from the website entirely. By the following Tuesday, she had filed for divorce. Irreconcilable differences. The irony was impossible to ignore. They had moved together like a team. Calculated, composed, and now they were unraveling in full view of the public. I didn't rejoice. That would be too easy. I sat on the terrace with a cup of mint tea, listening to gulls and the distant sound of children playing near the water. Miguel sat across from me, reading silently, one hand resting near mine. I thought it would feel better, I said, not looking up. It's not about feeling good, he said softly. It's about restoring balance. I nodded. But the truth settled deep inside me like a stone. I had not only lost a son, I had lost the illusion of what he might have been. That lingering hope that somewhere under the ambition and the resentment was the little boy who once held my hand tightly in a crowded grocery store, afraid of getting lost. That boy no longer existed, and maybe, just maybe, he never had. We walked slowly along the curve of the beach, our footprints sinking into the wet sand as the tide crept in behind us. Cascais had that soft hush in the mornings, when the wind hadn't yet stirred up the water, and the fishing boats still bobbed quietly in the distance. Miguel walked beside me, our hands brushing now and then. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. I had never felt this kind of freedom before. Not even when I sold the company, not even when the court dismissed the petition. This was something deeper. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of peace. Miguel glanced sideways. You're quiet today. I'm not used to feeling complete, I said, letting the words settle between us. We reached the end of the path where the rocks began and sat on the weathered bench facing the open sea. I pulled my scarf a little tighter against my shoulders, but not because I was cold. I was just holding the moment close. Later that afternoon, Dr. Sophia stopped by the villa. She wore her usual white coat over jeans, always practical, always warm. She smiled before she even sat down. The scans are in, she said, handing me a folder. There's continued regression. Your body is responding better than we expected. I looked at her carefully. How much better I'd say you've bought yourself years, not months. Good years if you keep treating your health like you have been. Miguel let out a low whistle. I laughed. Not a delicate, polite laugh. A real one. From the gut. I had bought myself years. After she left, Miguel poured 2 glasses of Vino Verde, and we sat on the terrace watching the sky melt from gold into rose. I've been thinking about your idea, I said. He raised an eyebrow. Which one, the program? The health-centered property? American patients looking for care they can't afford back home? There's something there. He leaned forward. I was hoping you'd say that. I don't want to be the name on the wall. I want to shape it. Build something that actually helps. You built Hayes Medical from a spare bedroom and a fax machine, he said. This will be a walk on the beach. I smiled. Literally. We spent the next weeks drafting ideas, part retreat, part clinic, part haven. I reached out to my old network, surprised to find how many people still remembered my name with warmth, not fear. I hadn't just built a company. I'd built relationships. And they hadn't forgotten. One morning, while reviewing documents in the sunroom, I paused over a photograph. David and me at our retirement party, Michael just behind us. I stared at it for a long time. Not with anger, not with regret, just understanding. Some chapters end not with a slammed door, but with a quiet breath. Later that week, I recorded something for Anna Brooks. She had asked for a closing quote. Something personal. She wanted to know what I'd learned. I told her this. My son tried to control my company after I got sick, but he never knew. I had kept something for myself. Not just the $8 million, but my freedom, my voice. And with those, I wrote the final chapter of my life. So here I am. Not broken, not bitter, just beginning again. If you've ever watched a mother stand up to reclaim her dignity, her worth, and her voice, share this story. Because somewhere another woman is about to take her first step. And she needs to know. She's not alone.